I'm Charis Tyndall, a director at Charles Ede. This year we are celebrating our 50th anniversary, and as such we decided to put on an exhibition of black glaze. Black glaze pottery was produced from the 6th to 4th century BC, roughly, in mainland Greece and in the Greek colonies in southern Italy. So I'm going to tell you a little on how they made these wares, and I think the most useful example I can give you is probably the skyphos, as it was likely the most widely produced form. This is a particular type of skyphos called a balsal, and to create it they would first take local clay and sift out any impurities and then knead it until they'd got rid of all the air bubbles. Once they had this finer clay, it would be thrown on a wheel, the potter's wheel being either hand-powered or powered by foot. Once they had created the desired shape, they would remove it and let it dry. And before it got to the fully leather-hard stage, they would take the vessel back again and put it back on the wheel and carve out the foot, the underside. They would then cover the whole piece in a sort of diluted slip. I guess it looked like a rust colour at the time, and still turning it on the wheel, which is why you get this very even, beautiful glaze all around it. Now, the interesting thing that differs in a lot of these, because they have so little in the way of decoration, which is one of the reasons I think they are such an attractive type of ware, but where they tend to have the most interesting decoration is often to the base. I love the subtlety of this because most of the time you have no idea what's actually sitting underneath there or how fine it can be until you've managed to lift it up and turn it about, probably after you've drained the contents. So the two different techniques of decorating the underside, and which was composed of in essence just concentric circles, was either by first covering the base in this black slip and then removing away a very small upper layer of the surface, which is what has happened here. And actually, if you look up very close, you can see that the decoration is raised because of it. So when you run your fingers across it, it's very beautiful and incredibly fine. The area that was now sort of revealed to the terracotta colour would then be covered in a wash, a kind of red wash known as a miltos. And then the whole thing was fired. The other way they would decorate the underside, as you can see on this fish plate, was by keeping the underside what we call reserved, which means undecorated, and then applying the black lines over the top of the red wash. So the whole thing would have the red wash first, and then they would apply the black lines on top. Interestingly, this fish plate has been used, so both techniques of decoration have been used, one for the underside, but then for the top, you can see where they will have glazed the whole surface and then scraped away to reveal this reserved area. So this is how you get the two different colours, the terracotta, the very earthy, rich red, orange, and then you have the black glaze. Once the desired decoration had been created and the whole piece was ready to be fired, it would be placed in the kiln. Often these objects were stacked, and you can see signs of stacking left on the surfaces of a lot of them. The firing process for these vessels occurred in 3 phases. In the first, there was oxygen in the kiln and the entire vessel turned red. In the second phase, when oxygen was removed, the entire vessel turned black. Now, the areas that had been covered in a slip protected the rest of the vase and made the surface impermeable. The areas that were left reserved, being porous, meant that during the third phase, when oxygen was reintroduced into the kiln, those areas that weren't covered in the slip would turn red again, whereas the rest of it kept this lustrous black surface that you can see now. Now, the Greek potters were known to really be the finest ceramicists in the world until, the last few centuries. And by about 550 BC, the workshop in Athens were where they were producing the finest quality ceramics in the Mediterranean world. Now, the Greeks colonised southern Italy. It began around the 8th century BC, but by the 6th century, that's where you start to see a lot of the production shifting, and by the 4th century, you see in southern Italy they're producing pottery in far greater quantities than they were in Athens. In southern Italy, they were becoming a bit more experimental than they were in Athens. You see more elaborate decoration, more exciting shapes perhaps, but it was the pieces in Athens that are often known to be thinner walled, and the glaze itself was much more lustrous. The terracotta was a deeper red. So black glaze is a ware that is much praised for the simplicity of form and of decoration, but there were three main techniques they used to decorate these vessels. One of them is with the use of added red. Really, it's the only colour to be found on them, and it's seen quite rarely, but was used very sparingly and could just beautifully highlight certain elements of the vessel. So for example, on this lekythos you can see here, added red, and we call it added red because it was applied after the firing process, and as such it's not part of the vessel in the same way as the black glaze is, and often flakes off. In the example here, however, it's very much still there, and you can see these, it almost looks like the reserved areas, but it's actually got fine lines of added red around the edge of the lip, and in three sections around the neck, just to highlight where there is a raised area in the surface. It's incredibly beautiful and very fine technique, and the lines used in this period for black glaze, it's always very fine added red. You see with other wares, sort of red figure, black figure, etc., they often use it much more lavishly. So the second type of technique we can see them use is stamp work, and in order to create this, they would, before adding or covering the vessel in the black slip, they would get a type of seal with a little decorative motif on it and simply stamp the surface of it. Of course, it couldn't be, this was before the leather hard stage as well, because you needed to be able to impress it without damaging the surface or cracking it. You can see a very good example of this here on our Phidias cup, where just beneath the handle, they have a beautiful little stamped palmette with sort of what looks like a scrolling acroteria. And the third form of decorative technique was ribbing, adjusting the surface so you can see here to look as though there's fluting, and you could get this both in vertical and horizontal. And they would either incise it, or they could use what would look kind of like a long ruler but with notches in it, so as a vessel was turned it would create horizontal ribbing around it. Though there'll be around 60 objects in the exhibition itself, it'll be accompanied by a catalogue that will have 40 of the finest or most interesting examples of the kind of tableware that you would have expected to find in ancient Greece.